on a different track, and now he's traveling the state, stirring up the principled people of America and getting them focused on making a difference and bringing about the change that you all desire. Ladies and gentlemen, it's Seth Morgan.
Fantastic. Everybody hear me? I can't hear you. Can everybody hear me? Thank you very much. You know, I remember back in 2009 in Dayton, kind of like a day like today where my contacts were in and the wind was blowing and I started crying. I'm joking with folks over here. I'm not pulling a Boehner if you see tears. I'm not pulling a Boehner. It's the wind and the contacts. But I remember it was a day like this that Dayton held its first Tea Party rally. That's where I'm from, the Dayton area. And we had about 8,000 people pack the courthouse square. And at that time, you remember what they said about us? Let's see, we were astroturfers, right? Paid to be there. We were white, rich males that were mad, right? We were racist. Matter of fact, the leader of the Dayton Tea Party had a hard time getting political figures on the stage. You know why? Because even the conservative Republicans, quote unquote, were scared of what it meant to get up on stage because they didn't know how the press was going to play it. Well, folks, that was 2009. Then in 2010, I remember speaking right before the election to the Cincinnati Tea Party at a fundraiser. It was kind of a closed-door event. About 100 people were in. It was a suit and tie event, top-notch, okay? And I remember at that point, we were on the eve of the November 2010 election. We were all very nervously watching what would happen. We, all of us, America, threw the bums out in Washington, threw the bums out in Columbus, and what was a racist, white middle, wealthy bunch of hack astroturfers turned out to be the worst nightmare for the politicians that cared about the status quo. Folks, there's a problem with the whole story. The great news is 2010 was a great success. The bad news is they still haven't gotten the message. Not completely. Because you see, this problem never was about Democrat versus Republican. This was about people who believed in American values versus those who did not. This is about people who believe that liberty is so important that we must give our all for it. That we must sacrifice our lives, our fortunes, and our what? Our sacred honors. The very thing that our founders pledged themselves to, which was a death sentence. It was a death sentence when they put their names to that Declaration of Independence, was it not? And that is the determination, it's the pride, it's the humility, it's all the whole package, the exact same attitude that each of us must have. Jim Woods told me today that this is about re-engaging that patriotic spirit that each of you have that caused you to be out here today on April 15th on a cold spring day to continue the fight. Why? Because the fight continues. November in 2010, everybody was watching it as a sea change moment in the political infrastructure because no one knew what to do with this thing called the Tea Party. Today, they know what the Tea Party's about. But they still are not convinced that we have the power necessary to overturn both Republican and Democrat. The Democrats think the Tea Party is nothing more than a right-wing extremist group of the Republican Party. And the Republican Party thinks that all you're going to do is get in line because they're the ones that control the power. Is that going to happen? No! It better not happen, because what's at stake, ladies and gentlemen, is the future of our country. The good news is, in November of 2010, we sent a message. We sent a news shot that was heard around the world. We sent the message that the status quo is not going to last. But the status quo at that point was defined as Democrat rule. Now there's a new status quo. And that doesn't mean everybody out there is doing a bad job. A new group of great leaders are coming to the plate. But folks, unfortunately, we're still seeing problems like a $14 trillion deficit. We're seeing problems in Ohio like an $8 billion budget structural deficit. And you know what we're hearing as we go across the state? The same old tired rhetorical lines that we've heard always before. Grandma's going to be kicked out of nursing homes. Criminals are going to be running wild on the streets. And those poor teachers, and there are some poor teachers, but there's a lot of teachers who make a whole lot more than you, the private citizens, make too. Those poor teachers are the ones taking it in the shorts. And ladies and gentlemen, I got news for you. It's the taxpayers who have taken it in the shorts for way too long. let me tell you, if we don't deal with the problems at hand, if we don't capitalize on this moment, if we don't see this movement continue to grow from its infancy, from that courthouse square in Dayton, Ohio, from a ranting political commentator who started the Tea Party in 2009 through his comments when he said, get rid of the bailouts. If we don't seize on the moment, on the opportunity that we are presented, I fear for the future of our country. Folks, the enemy that we have, that I believe is our greatest threat, is not Hussein across the big pond, okay? It's not terrorism abroad, although those things are still real threats, and we must be hawkish, in my opinion, about them. The biggest threat we have is the entitlement mentality that continues to drive the American people and the American politician who thinks that he or she can earn your vote by simply buying it through handouts. We have a $14 trillion deficit, and even the most conservative budget proposal that we're all excited about, the most conservative budget proposal in Congress right now, doesn't balance an annual budget until 2019. Ladies and gentlemen, we have a long way to go. The good news is we're on the road. We're on the road, the truck is started, the bus is started, and as John Kasich would say, either get on it or what? Get run over. Because folks, Tea Party Nation's coming, it better keep coming, because it is the hope, liberty-minded people are the hope for the restoration of this country. You know, Matt gave a very kind introduction. I'm grateful for the time that I've been able to serve both in office and out. My wife Deborah made it with me here today. She traveled with me from Huber Heights, Ohio. You really ought to give her a hand. She's a whole lot better to look at and a lot smarter than I am, but she hates it when I do this to her, by the way. But the reason I bring her up is I ran for city council when I was 23 years old in the city of Huber Heights, where I'm from, and I won. And to be honest with you, it was a little bit like, let me see if I can do this. It was 2001. It was before the Tea Party had maybe started to dream to come around. It was right after the Bush election where he won by, 900 some votes? Or probably a whole lot more until the Democrats stole a bunch of votes, but that's beside the point. And at that point, upon victory and upon winning some early political battles and getting taxes cut in Huber Heights, and the effect that we saw that one person or that a group of people could have in a political process, we really felt like God had called us to this. And let me say that this is not an effort that can stop or begin with someone serving in political office. The service in political office is something not everyone's called to, and it's certainly not something that you must do in order to have impact. Let me tell you, the politicians who are not principled, which by the way probably makes up a good 75 to 80%, if not more of them, who do not know exactly what they believe, the biggest thing they fear are rallies just like this that can mobilize and throw their rear end out of office when they don't do what's right for the country. You are having as big, if not bigger, of an impact than any good principled politician in Columbus or in Washington or in any other hall of government. And you must continue. You know, I referenced God, and I referenced the feeling that Deborah and I have that this is something, at least for this period of time, that we feel called to. And as I reflect on the things that has made this country great, it's the things we must fight for. We must fight to eliminate a $14 trillion debt. We must fight to deal with an $8 billion structural deficit in Ohio. We must fight to put liberty-minded politicians in places of power. But we must fight the temptation that will come. And this is where the action call comes for you today, where the call for patriotism comes. We must fight the temptation that will come with success. We are not people who are merely motivated by a $14 trillion deficit, are we? I hope not. I hope we're people that are motivated by getting back to the principles that made this country sound, that made it the bright shining light on a hill, that gave and protected us, gave us the liberty that has made this the greatest economy and greatest nation to live in. How are we going to do that? How are we going to do that? Well, we're going to focus on a bunch of different things, but I'd like to point out a couple. We're going to focus on stopping politicians who give handouts in order to get votes. We're going to focus on strict adherence to the Constitution. But let me tell you something else I think we must focus on. And it's something that far too often we forget. We are not about policies that are in our favor happening just at any level of government we like. You see, I believe the American founders viewed our government as a triangle. Local control, local power, local resources at its base. The least amount of resources and power was where? At the federal government. Concept called federalism, right? What must we be about? The politicians throughout the years have turned that triangle completely on its head, to where now on tax day you send the majority of your taxes to Washington, D.C. so they can take a piece of it and send a little bit of it back to the state that you reside in. So they can take a piece of it and send a little bit back to the county that you reside in. So the county can take a piece of it and send a little bit back to the local government that the jurisdiction you reside in. And then when you get mad, guess what? The biggest powers in D.C., they don't even know where you live, and you're upset and figuring out how to try to change the system. Folks, there's structural changes we must be about. And it's about flipping that triangle back on its base. It's about restoring the concept of federalism. Steve talked about it earlier with the fair tax. It's about restoring our power as people, the inherent power that was granted to us through the Constitution, through the Declaration of Independence, and ultimately the liberties not given by Washington, D.C., but given by God.
Right.
So that the people of America have the right and the ability to stand up to a tyrannical government when they step on our faces. So it's about that. What else is it about? It's about understanding the absolute relationship between morality and liberty. My friends, the theory that I have, and it isn't a theory, you might think it's a theory, but it's not a theory, is that without morality, there is no liberty. You will often hear it, that without liberty, there's no morality. And without morality, there's no liberty. That you often hear the morality being necessary for liberty. Alex de Tocqueville, there's all kinds of good quotes from our founders and that generation that would say that. But I would submit to you that without liberty, there's also no morality. These two concepts are mutually dependent upon one another. I challenge you to find a time in history where without liberty, the people were moral. I can't find it. And I challenge you to find a time in history that without morality, the people were free. Folks, we must reinstate that as well. Now, what does that mean? That doesn't mean that we come out with laws that favor our particular religious belief, because we're a nation founded in liberty. We're a nation founded without a state church. Is that not right? But my land, what does it mean? How do you be a patriotic citizen? How do you, at the most basic level, take back this country? It's about being principled in your politics. It's about making sure you understand the structure of government as the Constitution would have it to be. It's about living a principled life when it comes to your finances and caring about the morality most deeply that you have in your living room and your family room. That's the best way for us to be patriotic, in addition to coming here today and rallying here today. Why? Because an amoral people is an unfree people. And an unfree people also leads to that. They are mutually dependent upon one another, ladies and gentlemen. It's what it will take to restore the liberty that we all desire. It's what is often missing. You know what? When we stop taking care of ourselves, who is all too happy to step in and do it for us? The government. And they've done it time and time and time again, and over decades it became such a mother's milk, if you will, that the American people came to rely on it, and that stopped, thank God, in 2008 when Tea Party Nation stood up and said, I don't care if it's Bush or Barack Obama, we've had it with the handouts, we've had it with you taking care of us, we're going to take care of you. Is that not the case? My favorite story, ladies and gentlemen, from the Bible is the story about a woman who happened to be in a situation where she was made queen without her own desire. She ended up queen. It was something she didn't seek. And the king had a chief of staff. We'll name him Rahm Emanuel. And this chief of staff named Rahm Emanuel thought that there was no good crisis that should go to waste. You've heard that before. And so he suggested to the king that maybe what we ought to do is take care of this problem population we have in our kingdom called the Jews. Right? What the king didn't know was that his new queen was Jewish, because she hadn't told the king that. So this queen found out about this through an uncle who was a confidant of hers, and this uncle came to her and said, you must address the king, because if you don't address the king, who can tell he said, you'll perish with the rest of them. You'll die with the rest of them. And he asked her at that point, he said, who can tell whether or not you've been sent to the kingdom for such a time as this? And the queen listened to the wise counsel of her uncle, and she went in to see the king, and she came back and reported to her uncle and basically said, I'm giving the Seth Morgan version, I did it, and if I perish, I perish. Ladies and gentlemen, who can tell if God has not placed you in this moment, in this time, in this public square, in this century, in this decade, in this year, on this day, for such a time as this, if not to help restore what I believe has been the greatest experiment as a nation that this world has ever seen, called the United States of America. If God is who grants the liberty, and if liberty is what gives us the most power to have both not only our relationship with in the spiritual realm, but also economic power, because that's what's led to our success. It's not been government programs that's led to our success, it's been the liberty of entrepreneurism and innovation. That has been what has led to our most success. But if God is who grants that liberty, then who can take it from us? No one but ourselves. Ladies and gentlemen, it's time that we stand up and that we reclaim what has been rightfully given to us, a gift that was given to us and paid for by these men sitting on this front row, and men and women across this nation that have time and time again, who men maybe don't get the recognition you did, and we are so grateful for your service, but they quietly buried across the seas. Folks, we've been given a precious gift, a gift that these men and women have paid for, a gift that ultimately was granted to us by God, a gift that was secured for us in 1776 by men who did sign their death warrant. And friends, the story doesn't end there. It wasn't all roses. They didn't know how history would write their story. It was an experiment. Most of them gave up what they had. They didn't get to see the fruit of their labor. And friends, I'm not certain we will. That's the bad news. The good news is we've been sent here for such a time as this. And I don't know about you, but I can't wait to continue to engage next to you. As I like to say, whether I'm in front of the bus, beside the bus, or if I get thrown under the bus again, I'm on that bus, I'm with you. Let's continue to take back this country. I praise God, I thank God for your patriotism. I pray it will continue, and I'm with you as we do that. Let's do this thing for the generations before that have given us such a great gift. We're here together. It's such a time as this, and it's time to keep this movement rolling. Thank you very much for your patriotism. God bless you.
Thank you, Seth. No doubt after hearing Seth, you probably have in the back of your mind you just might see him again someday, huh? I think he's one of the future leaders here in America. Now, I'll tell you what, everyone, why don't you stand up? We've reached halftime at 6 o'clock. If you'll please stand up. Without question, we know that in this great land, one of our greatest freedoms is our right to speak as we wish, right? The freedom of speech. Now let me ask you, how many of you are proud to live in America? How many of you love the USA and all she stands for? And how many of you still believe she is still the last best hope for all mankind? Are you willing to sacrifice to celebrate her and preserve her? Absolutely, you're giving up your time tonight. Ladies and gentlemen, let's face it, talk radio has played an important role in reigniting the American spirit all across this great land. Perhaps that's why that's the most important freedom in this great country, the right to express your ideas in a civil manner and sometimes a passionate manner. Tonight we have with us, if you're familiar with 640 WHLO and WNCO 1340, this man needs no introductions. Ladies and gentlemen, from Quinn and Rose, it's our very own Great to have you in the back.
Hey, it's great to be here. Don't you get around? Hey, what a crowd! What a crowd! Thank you for inviting me out here. It's really great to be here. I know that one of the things about radio is that you hear somebody on a radio and you decide that that you like them and stuff, and then you go see them, and then I show up. I was, by the way, I'm honored to be in the presence of you guys from the Marines and the Army. Thank you for your service so much. I need a few notes here because Obama's got all the teleprompters. On the way over here, I don't get to Ohio very often, but on the way over here I was listening to Sean Hannity, and Sean had Ron Williams on, and they're talking about tax cuts and raising taxes, and Ron keeps throwing out that same old shibboleth, about, well, the Wall Street fat cats. What about the Wall Street fat cats, Well, if I remember correctly, about 2 years ago, the Wall Street fat cats didn't get their bonus, and Governor Patterson of New York was whining and crying that he wasn't getting his tax money. So, these people do not understand economics. I got to the point where, listening to Juan Williams and Stuart Varney and Sean Hannity, I got to the point where I turned it off, and I found a foreign language station from Cleveland. And I listened to that. I don't understand a word of it, but I don't understand a word of Ron Williams either. Anyway, it's good to be back to the scene of the crime, the festering days of my youth. I went to John Carroll, in case you didn't know. I went there for 2 years until they kicked me out. But, and I worked for 92.3 in Cleveland when it was a jazz station. That was a long time ago. I have a lot of memories about Ohio.